Hello, I'm Roger Dove, and I'm really pleased to be able to talk to all of you on my official Facebook group. So thank you very much for all the questions you ask. I hope you're going to enjoy the answers. And here I am sitting in my garden in deepest, darkest Brighton, as I'm cut off from the world of London at the moment, but wanted to take the opportunity to have a chat. This question is one posed by Nico, which is, will Reckless and Fetish end up in the Parfum-Cologne collection? I've really been asked this question a lot, and I don't know quite what the answer is. At the moment there's no plan, so that's a straightforward answer. But when we launched the Parfum-Colognes, the whole concept, the story of it, was something really new, and we were intrigued to see how people would react to it. What's really gladdening is that people all around the world seem to have gone nuts for it, which is really very nice. So thank you all for your support with it. So as we look at how these perfumes, Parfum-Colognes, carry on selling, we of course will look to see, do we add something else to it? Whether that is a new men's launch, or we look at the rest of the collection. And the answer to your question is, no decision's been made. It's still too early, because in the scheme of it, the Parfum-Colognes are still babies that have only just started walking. Barrett, you've asked a really interesting question, but you won't like the answer. That is there any plan to relaunch the original NüWa? Sadly, I couldn't sell the original NüWa even if I wanted to. I would need to alter it, because so many changes have come with IFRA and the European Cosmetic Directive that we would not be able to sell it anymore as it is. So I'm really sad to say that the answer to it is no. It is one that just has to be committed, I hope, to beautiful memories. Gabriel, I don't know if you're a kind of mind reader or a clairvoyant, but your question is an interesting one. You said that you're aware that I've made scents that are inspired by locations, regions of the world. Might I ever think to create a perfume inspired by a particular era, like the Roaring Twenties? All I have to say on that one, Gabriel, is really watch this space closely. As I say, I don't know if you have a mole within my company that you have a hotline into, but you'll see that the answer to that might get answered sooner rather than later. This question was asked by Alexei or Alexej, excuse me, because I'm not quite sure how you like to pronounce your name. You ask, do I work on perfumes to a schedule, or is it something that is just a creative flow? The answer to your question is both. Sometimes somebody might ask me to create a scent, like the one I did for Lakme for the Royal Opera House in Muscat in Oman. It was for a very specific purpose, so it was for the opening of a new production of the opera Lakme, so the perfume had to be ready by a very particular time. The same is true with A Midsummer Dream, because it was to do with something very specific, to do with an anniversary and Shakespeare. So it really is a mix. Bespoke perfumes too. You know, if somebody has a wedding and they've commissioned a perfume for a wedding, then that's the date. The majority of the perfumes, we come with ideas as to what we think we might want to launch. So we think that we maybe want to launch a new woman's perfume, a perfume inspired by an idea that I've had or whatever. And so we have a loose idea as to when we think that perfume maybe will launch, and then hopefully it launches when the idea comes. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the perfume will come 6 months later, 9 months later. It really just does depend. Eliana has asked a question which I really like, which is, she has noticed that I have very often used the note of violet in my work. And is it because I love the note, or is it because there's a special meaning in this raw material for me? I think that what I would say is that any artist has their own style. They have things they like and things they don't like. Look at any painter and you'll see that there are certain pigments they use or mediums in which they choose to work. Certainly the same is true for me. There are a lot of raw materials which I love, which are very well documented. And there are some raw materials which I really dislike enormously. So therefore I would never use a raw material that I dislike. Why would I? Because I'm going to end up not liking the end effect or end raw material. I think violet methyl ironone is one of those materials which just has a wonderful effect on other raw materials within a composition. So Great Britain has an enormous note of violet. You smell quite a lot of violet also in A Goodnight Kiss. But generally the violet is there because it modifies, it blends and modifies other raw materials within the composition. Not all the perfumes I have a powdery aspect, of course they don't, but I also love materials like orris, which I use quite a lot. And so violet and orris sit really in the same olfactive world. So they'll often be sit side by side. It's a really, really important raw material. Violets make me think of childhood. On a totally separate note, the childhood memory, going to the West Country, which was famous for violets. It's part of the story you hear me talk about in the perfume Great Britain. They're fragile, they're delicate, they live in the woodland. I love chypres, so the smell of the woodland is my favourite olfactive universe. And whenever visitors come to Britain from overseas, I always buy them a very, very funny gift. And I think that they're either going to totally love this thing or dislike it enormously. Something wildly old-fashioned and incredibly traditional are rose and violet creams. I think the very best are made by Fortnum & Mason, and I always buy a box of them if somebody's staying here and put them in their room for when they arrive. So the violet, quintessentially English in a funny way, very, very beautiful. I'm sure, like a lot of people actually, it's just entwined in my cultural upbringing and my life without me even realizing. So I'm answering this as I'm going along, and I hadn't thought of that before. So thank you very much for the question. Farukul, I really hope I pronounced your name properly, forgive me if I haven't, has asked, what are my top 5 fragrances personally? So without question, I would say Vetiver and Diaghilev. I've always said I hope that I'm remembered for making these 2 perfumes. A Goodnight Kiss, because that is the most personal of all the scents of mine. My own fragrance, Roja Haute Luxe, and the other, Great Britain. The pinnacle of my working career was when the government asked if I would become an ambassador for my country. I'm very proud of being a cultural ambassador for the Great Britain campaign, and that scent was a scent I was asked to make to try to capture the spirit of an entire nation in a perfume. It was a really fascinating thing to do, and I'm really, really proud of the end result, and for the Great Britain campaign who asked me if I would make it. Guaraf, I'm really thrilled to hear that Parfum de Nuit number 3 is your holy grail scent. Thank you. You ask whether I might end up adding to the collection Parfum de Nuit number 4, and I hear some other people have asked will there be a 5 or 6. There's really no plan to. I think that when you just add like that, the whole concept was about this idea of 3 people that I imagined at night. I think it would be a little bit cynical to carry on imagining other people and just adding to that collection. I think that I would prefer to come up with new ideas, fresh ideas and new concepts. Otherwise, I think it will put a bit of a stranglehold on the whole idea of creativity. But I'm thrilled that you like them enough that you want more. But my thing is, please be thrilled with your number 3, and I hope you carry on loving wearing it. And I hope that other perfumes that I come up with delight you for totally different reasons. The next one's for Will. Thank you very much for your question, Will. You've asked various questions about legacy, about do I do bespoke, semi-bespokes, and so on. So from what I understand, it seems there's a little bit of confusion around all of these because they're things we don't talk about very often. So I thought I'd take the opportunity to answer your question, but at the same time explain all of them. So the first is, let me talk about heritage. So the Heritage Collection, I love the idea that people can still buy fragrances from us, even though they weren't particularly very successful. Many of you will have heard me talk for years and years and years about how scent is all about memory, it's about reconnecting with people, places and moments in time, and that scents become part of who we are identified as very often. So we came with the idea of the Heritage Collection so that people that like these more obscure fragrances, if you like, can still get hold of them. They're only available for sale in the Burlington Arcade in our boutique there. They're available in the Roja Haute Perfumery up on the 5th floor of Harrods, and of course, where most of you discover them is online, communicating with the team in our office, Nadia and the two Jacks. So that's that collection. The next is the Legacy. So the Legacy collection came about because we have so many people asking or inquiring about bespoke perfumes, where I think people don't really have an understanding of what a true bespoke perfume is all about, what it entails, which I'll talk about in a minute. You might imagine that when I'm working, of course, I'm working on this project, but I don't only make one perfume. A lot of different ideas come as you go along, and sometimes you put this ingredient in and it makes the scent go off that way, so you follow that path while still going down the path you are on. So in the end, I decide which scent is the one which will become whatever, whether it's a Fetish or Enigma or Elysium, and I end up with the others left. So either you decide, okay, well, these are really great perfumes, however, I'm just going to throw the formula away, or we came with the idea that lots of people who want bespoke don't want to wait. It's a trait we all have. We make our mind up, we want something, we want to have it immediately, which bespoke can never be that way. So these perfumes, Legacy, are a series of perfumes you can only get in two places in the world. We have it in the Burlington Arcade Boutique and in the Roja Haute Perfumery. They just have numbers, and when you come, you smell it and you decide you love it, so you buy it. You end up getting a collection of different products. You get a 100 ml spray, you get two 50 ml sprays, and you get three 30 ml sprays. But the important point of it is that then no one else can buy that perfume but you. So it becomes, if you like, a unique signature scent to you because no one else can wear it. It has all the end effect as if you've had a bespoke perfume, although of course it wasn't actually made for you, it's one that you have chosen, but no one else in the world can ever buy it but you, which is why we ended up giving it the name Legacy, because who knows, you might pass it on to somebody else in your family and they can carry on buying it from us. Next is the whole concept of bespoke. The reality of bespoke, it is horrifically expensive. It is something by the very nature of the cost that very few people will ever be able to afford. We don't price it deliberately to make it out of everybody's reach, but it takes the most enormous amount of work to make a bespoke perfume. I have to meet the person on several occasions. Each meeting can last for hours. I then have to work on the perfumes themselves and present them. If there's anything about the perfume that the person doesn't like, I have to rework the formula. And so you need to allow somewhere between 6 months and 2 years for this work. Very often I quickly will say that the perfume is actually finished in around a year. The difference between a bespoke perfume and a commercial perfume is when I make a perfume like Enigma, men's or women's, which the world seems to have fallen in love with, we will sell thousands and thousands of bottles of it. So you get something which allows us to do the more esoteric things, which maybe don't really make us any money. When you make a bespoke perfume, I sell it once. So hours and months of work go into that one thing with no more income. So all the raw materials, all the perfume trials that get thrown away, all the travel, all the time, to be able to sell it just once. So by the nature of it, whilst I love making bespoke perfumes, because I really have established some really great relationships with the people that I've been lucky enough to work with, I think that the Legacy collection gives you the best of both worlds as a consumer. whilst I understand it's still very costly, but I hope that explains the difference. The last of them is something which in fact is not a Roja Parfum product, which is the semi-bespokes. When I started my own company back in 2001, shortly afterwards Harrods asked me if I would open a shop within their shop. That was one of the pinch me moments of my life, because I think most people would have to bang on Harrods' door really, very loud to be able to get a product in their shop. And it happened for me the other way around. They came and said they wanted to open a shop with me. When I started, I didn't think anybody would be interested in my work, my voice in perfumery, if you like. But when the shop opened, people kept coming in and asking, where is the Roja Dove product? Where is the Roja creation? So I came with this idea of making a perfume. To begin with, there was only one, and decided that only 50 people in the world could own it. The reason for that, my company has always been privately owned, so suddenly tying up all the money in the raw materials and so on to make 50 bottles was a huge financial commitment for me. And so that's where the number came from. And I decided that only 50 people in the world could ever own that perfume, and if in a year you didn't renew your place on the list, then that place becomes available again. I didn't give them a name. The name was given by the team in the Roja Dove Haute Parfumerie up on the 6th floor in Harrods, and they started to refer to them as the semi-bespokes. I couldn't think of a better name, albeit that name is an oxymoron, I'm aware of that, but I thought the name was a great name and the name stuck. It was the name my team gave them. So the only place in the world you find those is up on the 6th floor in the Roja Dove Haute Parfumerie, and really people adore these perfumes. You find some of the most creative of all of my work because they were never ever created to be commercial. They were created to be, well, you'll see if you get to smell them. They're very, very specific. They're 100% just my idea of how something should be, with absolutely no regard to how well people react to them. And that actually is what people love, and who would have guessed that they've taken on a life all of their own, and actually real perfume lovers seem to go nuts for them. So Adam has asked a question about new regulatory changes to certain raw materials. He has cited Jasmine and Ylang Ylang, and how will that affect my work? I think one of the things that is a way of working for everyone is the fact that these regulations are constantly changing. Perfumery, which most people don't realize, is one of the most highly regulated industries within the world. So we're constantly having to look at formulas, we're constantly having to make the modifications. One of the things that I very often do, working with the compounders, is get oils supplied where the particular natural isolate which causes the upset is removed, which means at least the main raw material doesn't change, but just one tiny aspect. And then it's a case of maybe having to modify the formula to replicate that effect somehow. What I would say with all of it is we of course have had to make modifications of certain sense as the regulations around the world alter. I don't believe that I've really ever had anybody write in to say that they have noticed it, and I do think it's because we work always where we can with this idea of having the natural isolate removed from the oil, which is such a tiny fraction of the whole that people don't spot the difference. Matt, you asked me a question which is a lovely question, because in a funny way it's more personal than you can possibly imagine. You said that in my book you read that the reason I wrote my book was I always hoped that I would find an apprentice, and that I felt that was never going to happen, and so I wanted to write down the things that I know for what they're worth, for other people, for the future, for posterity. I've always said, I've always believed that each of us has an obligation to share what we know with other people and to future generations. Of course, as I get older, I feel that more and more, and I hope that if you spoke to anybody who works with me, one of the things I hope they will comment on is that I really do try to nurture the people who are around me. It's why I spend as much of my time as I do supporting the Fragrance Foundation, which if you're not aware of it, you should look up Fragrance Foundation UK. because it's a non-profit making educational organization that really helps promote the understanding of perfumery. So I, of course, have worked in my industry for such a long time that many of the people that I knew at the beginning of my career were old, and they were the link to the great perfumers of the 20s, 30s and 40s. So I got to hear lots and lots of anecdotes, and I wanted to be certain those things were put down. I also think, whilst I think the internet is one of the most phenomenal things to have happened, because suddenly information is available to everybody, one of the downsides is that I think that it also can tend to make people become lazy. I heard that because there were 2 editions of the book, and in the second edition I particularly put certain things in it because I was hearing journalists who really should know better almost quoting verbatim things from press releases that I knew were totally incorrect, but knew that the information was so obscure that it would be hard to find. So I added the information into the book. I can't say what they're about because I would be saying that a company ended up lying about something. There's a whole thing you'll never get to the bottom of. However, so these things were put in the book to make sure that factually people could find the information very easily. The thing of finding the apprentice, I don't know if you can imagine, but I get so many people write to me saying, you know, that I have a great sense of smell, I absolutely love perfume, I would love to come and work with you. I've had people come and write to me saying, I'd come and work to you and with you and don't want to be paid, blah, blah, blah. None, of course, I would dream of accepting. I think that most people's idea of what is needed to become a perfumer is really not in most people's imagination. First, you'll need a science degree. If you don't have a degree in science, no one will open a door to you. You have to start really, really so at the bottom as to be untrue. And then you have the thing that if eventually you can train, it is so many years, you know, more than a doctor takes to study. So I think that the problem is, and it's a very romantic one, that for many people the idea is based just on that. It's based on a romantic notion of reality. So that's difficult. Also, you know, my company, it's privately owned, and the idea of investing, I never found the person, I quickly will say, but the idea of investing the time, and I don't know that I'm the right person for it. I learnt about perfumery at a very different time in history. So the way I learnt was really organic. I learnt on the job about perfumery. I'm sure that if I tried to get a job working for a major company, they wouldn't want me because I don't actually have the qualifications. Today everything is about that. And so I wish everybody and anybody luck that wants to become a perfumer. I've started a campaign in the UK with the Fragrance Foundation. You know, we've got our industry valued for the very first time because we're trying to get both a career path and an educational path in this country to do with perfumery. None of it exists. People who I'm sure are extremely talented write in and ask, where do I go? And I have to say abroad, but there's nowhere really abroad either. So you have to get into your mind clearly that you need to get a job in a compounding house. You need to find out from the compounders what the qualifications are you need. You then need to gear all of your studies up to get those qualifications. No one ever talks to me that way. Everybody talks about, I want to be a perfumer, but not what do I need to do to get there. I don't know if that's quite the answer you wanted. I would have loved to have met the person, but the time's not there anymore. And so hence my book, hence why I try to do these things, answering questions and answers, which is tiny, not quite the same. And I try to guide people and put people in touch. In all the years, I've only, that I'm really aware of, managed to help one person who I now know is a trainee perfumer out of all the people that have written to me. And anyone who works with me will tell you that anyone who writes, I always answer, and I always try to put them in touch with the right person. But just once has someone managed to start to fulfill the dream. They're on the pathway. Andrew, you've asked me which perfume has pained me most to discontinue. The first thing I'd have to say is the thing of discontinuation is driven always because things just don't sell. For whatever the reason, they don't capture people's imagination, or I don't know, they just don't work. It was what drove the idea for the Heritage Collection, because I've always said that scent is so associated with memories and people that not to be able to have a scent that you fell in love with is too sad. So where I can, we put them into that collection. To answer your question, I would say there are two that immediately come to my mind. One is Mischief. I think Mischief is, sadly, one of the most undervalued creations I have ever made. It is a scent which is full of bright playfulness, which might sound silly as its name implies. It has a big note of lily of the valley with a lot of very, very fresh raw materials, floral, bright and fresh. And I had in my mind a very particular person. As you know, I always think of a person. And the person for Mischief was that person that maybe would walk up to our counter, knows the staff or doesn't, but with such a big smile, and then will move everything around, which they really shouldn't do and mess it all up. But because they have this gorgeous smile on their face, you don't mind. They're mischievous and playful, and that is why you love them. The second, I would say, is Neroli. I really worked very, very hard on the Neroli, and I find a lot of Nerolis in the market are very, in my opinion, very synthetic, and don't really pay attention to all the different elements we get from the orange. I think it's gorgeous, and I think it's really a shame that the people that use it, I know, adore it, and yet it captured, again, very few people's imagination or attention. But it's available in Heritage Collection. Lastly, I know that you are somebody who's always liked Risque, and so I don't know if you know, but that also is in the Heritage Collection. Difficult to find, really you can say the most difficult of all my creations to find, but they're all available in the Burlington Arcade Boutique when that opens again, on the 6th floor of Harrods in the Roger Dove Oak Perfumery. Harrods is opening up on the 15th of June, so for all the fragrance lovers, you'll be able to go and discover the scents once more there, and of course through our online boutique.